Bibles to the book of 1 Peter, the first epistle of Peter. And continuing through, we will start in typical fashion here at 1 Peter 3:21. And I was reminded again to be aware and kind of have your radars up. If you are visiting a church or visiting somewhere and they just jump right into something and start at some chapter randomly, you yourself be a Berean and see if those things are so. Acts 17:11, remember the Bereans searched the scriptures. They were more noble than those of Thessalonica because they searched the scriptures daily to see if what Paul was saying was true or if it was some false thing. How do you do that? Well, you see what's before and what's after. And I like taking the few verses before just because for me it refreshes what we went through last week, what we looked at. So 1 Peter 3, chapter 3, verse 21, the like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is gone into heaven and is on the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers being made subject unto Jesus Christ, for as much then as Christ has suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves likewise with a 44 Magnum. Oh no. Arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. For he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lust of men, but now live to the will of God. For the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lasciviousness, lusts, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries, wherein your old friends think it's weird, strange that you don't run with them anymore. To the same excessive riot, speaking evil of you, they talk behind your back. These guys are going to, verse 5, give an account to him that is ready to judge the quick and the dead. For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. So heavy stuff, right? Just in these first 6 verses of 1 Peter 4, think about baptism. Because that's what should be in your mind if you were to just read through the Bible and not stop. It's fresh in your mind, this whole idea of baptism. And it tells us in chapter 3, verse 21, it's not about the outward, the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but rather the inward, the conscience of a good, or the answer of a good conscience toward God. In other words, it's not the outward, what can be seen externally, it's the inward. It's the conscience. It's what God sees toward God. I was reminded today by a lovely dear sister, I don't know the heart. None of us knows the heart or what's inside, the inward. It's always God and Him alone that knows them. And that's what baptism is about. Baptism is not something that is external, that it doesn't matter. People can get baptized, dunked in the tank, and there's no relationship, there's no substance, there's nothing there. It's possible. but we don't know the heart. We really don't. But what you're doing in baptism, what the whole idea of it isn't, it's like a wedding ring. That's the best way I can put it. People see the wedding ring and they know that I'm married. People see that you've been put under the water, brought back up. It's a picture, again, back to 1 Peter 3, that by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you've been buried with him under the water and raised to newness of life. Come out of the water, a new creation. And it's an outward symbol of something that's taking place inside of you, that's already taken place in your heart. So you have died, and now you're being raised to one. So with that in mind, think of how Christ suffered. Verse 1, chapter 4. Think of, for as much then as Christ has suffered for you in the flesh, you think likewise. Put on the mind of Christ. Put on that Philippians chapter 2 mindset. Put others before you. Philippians chapter 2. If it's been a while, jot that down next to the same mind there in 1 Peter 4:1, where we arm ourselves with that same mind. And it's the mind of Christ. For he has suffered in the flesh. And if that happens, when you suffer in the flesh, it's harder to sin. Ask the guy that was the life of the party. There was an article years ago about this party animal, really, who he was always the one that brought the keg to the party, right? He was the guy, nothing evil in his heart or anything like that. It was just everyone wanted to be around this guy because he supplied the stuff, right? And he was just always, nobody could out-drink him, nobody could out-party him, and until his 3-year-old daughter was ran over and killed by a drunk driver. And when that happened, something strange happened to this fellow. He no longer could get the keg. He no longer could get why people would drink to that point, to where all of a sudden it was hard for him. You suffer in the flesh and you cease from sin. You don't even realize it. A lot of time, people don't even realize it. If the suffering is great enough, if something that tragic and terrible happens and you see the reality of sin, it will cause you to cease from it. And if you want the ultimate reality, look to the cross. See Jesus and the blood flowing out. See his back mangled. See his side pierced. See his hands and his feet pierced. And see what sin does. Because that's the perfect picture of it. And it should cause us to cease from sin. That we, verse 2, again, no longer should live the rest of our time in the flesh, according to the lust. And again, lust has nothing to do with sex. In our culture, that's what everyone automatically thinks. Lust is sexual, and that's for the perverts and for those people that are in that category. No, lust is wanting something. It's the whole idea of coveting. Wanting something that belongs to someone else. And we can lust to that point where we find ourselves in sin. And the idea is really kind of a twisted idea to just want something so that person no longer has it. It's really an evil type of thing, this word lust and the idea of coveting. But the idea in verse 2 is we've lived enough time in that. And sadly, there's many Christians who think, no, I haven't had enough time in that. Didn't get all my party days out. So I need to go and just kind of, I can compromise here and there. I can dabble in this. And they for some reason think they're missing out on something. No, that's not the case. The enemy would have you believe that you're missing out on something. But I like what John Corson in his commentary had to say. Suffering looses you from the grip of sin. In other words, when you go through that physical suffering, it will loosen the grip that sin has on you. We don't like it when that suffering comes initially, but that's what God is doing. He's loosening that grip, that sin. Is there something that has a grip on you, that has a hold on you? Are you struggling with sin? Do you want to live and keep living with that thing grabbing a hold of you and that thing choking you to death, quite literally? Then stop living according to the flesh. Start living according to the will of God. You can live according to the flesh. Speaking of that, animals live according to the flesh. Animals, it's just fascinating I just like this illustration, but there's a lot of them out there in the animal world. The snapping turtle knows that I got to get to sand. I got to get somewhere where I can dig a hole. And he just knows instinctively. He's going off of his fleshly desires and feelings and just goes with that. And he goes and digs a hole, lays those eggs. He doesn't, or she doesn't, the tortoise doesn't get why they're doing it. And yet they do it, and it repopulates, it brings forth more snapping turtles. And it's like just something that's in their nature. It's in their flesh to go along with that desire. For us, we are not animals. I am not an animal, despite what you have learned in public school. You are not an animal. You cannot live like animals, and they are living like animals all around us. It is survival of the fittest for many. They think in that way. We cannot do that. We cannot be driven by our own desires. Why? Because you will kill yourself. We are, my dad likes to say, self-destructive. We are very self-destructive. If you just live and follow your heart, as Disney tells us, to just do what makes you happy, find something that makes you feel good. Hey, if we really did that, we would be dying a lot sooner. And it's sadly happening around us. A lot of people just living after their feelings and thinking that that's what it's all about. Well, don't worry if they think it's strange that you don't run with them anymore, that you're not in that crowd anymore. And don't look at verse 6. Some people have taken verse 6 out of context and said, see, this for this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead. So when you die, you're going to have another chance to hear the gospel. See, it's right there. No, what that refers to is those who have died in faith and that have had the gospel preached. Ephesians 4:9, Luke chapter 16, the story of the rich man and the beggar, Lazarus. We're told Lazarus' name. We're told the beggar's name, but we're never told the rich man's name. I love that. Jesus style. Who cares who the rich man was? Only the world would. But the beggar, the one that no one paid any attention to, we know his name. And it's interesting, his name was Lazarus. The only one. It's not the same Lazarus, but it speaks of one who's been raised from the dead. And that's exactly what the rich man was begging. Let me go back and send someone back to warn them. And what did he say? Even if Abraham, It said even if we send someone, they have the prophets, they have the law. Even if one was to be raised from the dead, still they would not believe. Why? Because they follow their own desires. Men love the darkness more than the light. And we go through hard times, right? That's what this morning message is. I'm going to get there, I think. But what it's speaking of, the gospel being preached to the dead, is when Jesus not only was crucified on the cross, but he descended into the lower parts of the earth and preached to those who were in that place, Abraham's bosom, and set the captives free. That's what's being referred to in verse 6. So don't let someone twist that and falsely say, you'll have a second chance, don't worry about it. No, this is the only shot you got, is this life. And then keeping in mind, what I love about Peter is you're going to hear and see this alluded to. And we have kind of seen how this has been alluded to. The end, verse 7 goes on, but the end of all things is at hand. The end of the world is at hand. Not just the end of the world, the end of all things. What does that mean? Well, to get a good glimpse into that, Revelation chapter 6 all the way through to 22. 6 through 19 is the stuff that's going to be going on that you don't want to be around for. And it's no wonder the church is not mentioned anywhere in Revelation chapters 6 through 19. That's the end of all things for this world, for the judgment that's coming. Those who are scoffing, and they'll continue to scoff. They'll continue to pick apart and tear apart what we believe, what we hold on to. Let them. The end of all things is at hand. But you, therefore, verse 7 goes on, be ye therefore sober, or I like to put in there, serious, knowing that the end of all things is at hand. And this is just a disciple, a student of Jesus, who would say, watch unto prayer. Watch and pray. Every single day. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. But I want something new and exciting. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. And always remember this, if it's new, it's probably not true. If it's true, it's not going to be new. I love that old saying, but it's such one I've held on to for a long time. Watch and pray. Be serious and understand the time. The times are, Moses said, teach us, Lord, teach me to number my days. James, we were just in the book of James where, man, our life is a vapor. It's here today, gone tomorrow. We have no clue. None of us. And I love verse 8. This is one to highlight, underline, make bold. Above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. And I absolutely love the King James word charity. Because, why? Why do I love that so much? Because of what I've been raised in, what you've been raised in. In America, what we see and hear when we see love. What people have in their mind. And if you've never read it, I encourage you to read it again or pick it up C.S. Lewis's book, The Four Loves. It will cause you to say, what? That's nothing like I saw in whatever movie you were watching. Because our culture, this whole world is obsessed with one of those four loves. Can you guess which one? Eros, from where we get our word erotic. The sexual kind. That's what everyone's obsessed with. In fact, people think that's what life is all about. Is that Eros love. And I love C.S. Lewis in his book. He says, imagine, because we've all, probably most of us in this room, have fallen in love. And you go back to that day when you met your spouse for the first time. You couldn't eat. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't function. Because you were what? Smitten with the love of your life. You couldn't talk about anything else. You could hardly wait to get off of work. It was just always on your mind, right? There's billions of songs about this. This is what this Eros love is. Can you imagine now if that's what it was all about? And that's what you would never accomplish anything if that was the case. You would never accomplish anything because you'd be so just tunnel vision on this one person, this one thing, obsessed. And it would be dangerous. You would never accomplish a thing. So that's not what it's about. Don't let that culture, don't let the culture around you influence you as you see the Netflix movies, as you see the stuff that's out there. Man, it's all around you. The enemy would want you to believe that's what it's all about. That's what, and it, don't be taken under the spell of Eros. And we've all been under the spell of Eros, me included, in this room. Fall asleep with the phone on your ear. So our culture is obsessed with that one kind of love. But guess what? There's so much more. There's a love that's, the King James says charity, but the word is agape. It's this love that is unconditional. It's not looking for something in return. It's not a self-giving love. It's not something that, what can I get out of this? It's the kind of love the Father has for every one of us. It's the kind of love Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? Now he said, do you phileo me as a brother, as a family member? Do you love me, Peter? Come on, Lord, you know I do. But what was he getting at? Do you agape me? The way that I love you. It's this love that is sacrificial, loyal, faithful, dedicated, willing to lay down your life and your own desires, willing to lay aside what you want so that your wife would be lifted up, exalted, so that your kids would make, would be made better. You die to your own wants, your own desires, your own lust. And that kind of love covers a multitude of sins. Proverbs 10:12. I like Proverbs 10:12 because it reminds us, and the book of Proverbs, man, just the way that things are worded. But Proverbs 10:12, you might jot that next to verse 8. In Proverbs 10:12 it says, hatred stirs up strifes or gossips, backbiting. This describes strifes. Hatred does that, but love covers or blankets sin. Love just totally covers it. It is in our nature to want to hear the bad news about someone, to want to get the juicy gossip about someone. It's in our nature. We perk up when we hear stories that have nothing to do with us, but it's about someone else that we haven't seen for a while, but we know them. It's in our nature to do that. Another great example of this, also, while I'm in Proverbs, I forgot what this one, probably a good one too. Proverbs 17:9. He that covers a transgression seeks love. Proverbs 17:9. But he that repeats a matter will separate friends. In other words, just repeating the same mistakes and talking about the mistakes that others have made, the transgressions that others have slipped up. Man, you're just going to separate friends if you keep doing that. But let's be people of love. I love Genesis chapter 9. In Genesis 9, you don't have to turn here, but you know the story, I hope. The flood has ended. Noah is pretty comfortable now. And in Genesis 9, verse 19, there were 3 sons of Noah, and the whole earth was overspread by them. Whether you knew it or not, you come from one of these 3 people in this room. Each and every one of us do. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, Ham was a dirty, rotten guy. And we're going to see this is what caused him to be cursed. Noah planted some vineyards. He started drinking wine from that vineyard. This is Genesis 9:21. He drank of the wine. He was drunk. And he was uncovered. In other words, he was naked in his tent. You guys remember this story? It's kind of cool when this is in the Bible? This kind of stuff? Yeah. Teach your kids. They'll be into it, these kind of stories when you pull them out. But notice what Ham does. Verse 22, Genesis 9:22. And Ham, the father of the Canaanites, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brethren, those other 2 guys, Shem and Japheth, look at Dad, and kind of just pointed it out. He's naked, he's drunk. What a fool. Look at how dumb our father looks. And it was dumb for him to do this. I'm not justifying it, nor was Shem and Japheth. But Shem, in Genesis 9:23, it was Shem and Japheth who took a garment and they covered their father's nakedness. They loved their father. They covered that exposed blunder, that blooper. They didn't exalt it. They didn't expose it as people make a living off of exposing other people's garbage and sins and trespasses. But let's be those who love and cover a multitude of sins. Use hospitality, back to 1 Peter 4, verse 9. Use hospitality one to another without grudging. Invite people to stay in your house and then don't complain that they left the toilet seat up or they did this or that, No, show them hospitality without grudging. This stuff is not hard to do. I will remind you, it's impossible. What do you mean? With man, it is impossible to show hospitality without grudging. But with God, what? All things are possible. Even this kind of hospitality, this kind of love. Verse 10 goes on, as every man has received the gift, you also even so minister the same one to another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Don't miss that. That's such a heavy. Are you a good steward of the manifold grace of God? If you're a believer, if you're in this room and you know Christ, you are a steward of God's grace. He has shed His grace on you. Are you a good steward? I just had to write that question down. Am I a good steward of the manifold grace of God? Verse 11. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles or the word of God. If any man minister, let him do it as of the ability which God gives, that God in all things may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom be praise and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Oh, you thought he was done. Verse 12. This is the title of my message. Comes from verse 12, really. Beloved, think it not strange concerning these fiery trials which is to try you, as though something strange is happening unto you. But rather rejoice, inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's suffering, that when his glory shall be revealed, you may be glad also with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye. For the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On their part, he is evil spoken of, but on your part, Jesus, he is glorified. Verse 15, but let none of you suffer as a murderer, or a thief, or an evildoer, or a busybody in other people's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, by the way, that word Christian is only used 3 times in the entire New Testament. This is the only other time outside of the book of Acts that this word Christian is used in the Bible. If any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. And here it is again. He lets us know what to keep in mind, for the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, where shall the ungodly and the sinner appear? Wherefore, let them that suffer according to the will of God. This is underlined in my Bible. Let them that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing as unto a faithful Creator. I've only got an hour left. I've got to really rush through. I'm just kidding. Kind of kidding. Suffering and glory. These two are woven through this 1 Peter epistle. The word suffering and the word glory are just, they go hand in hand. And really they are 2 sides to the same coin. Suffering and glory. The world would have us believe that diminish the suffering, take the suffering away, and that would be glorious. But quite the opposite is true. In the presence of suffering, when suffering is there, hey, glory. Glory is coming. Glory awaits those who are suffering. And everybody is craving and looking for and wanting and desiring the kabod. That's the word for glory. It just means heavy, weighty, substantial, something of substance. Somebody once said it's like having a cotton candy in one hand and a sirloin steak in the other. And taking a bite, there's no substance in the cotton candy. Yeah, it's sweet, but it's just air. And then when you sink your teeth into that sirloin, that's the glory, the weighty stuff, the stuff that has substance. There's a biblical term when this has been taken away, and it became someone's name. Ichabod. Kabod. The glory has departed. Ichabod. Taking away that glory. Now, way back in the beginning, God created man and woman with this glory covering them. And guess what happened? Ichabod. The glory had departed. And so ever since then, we have tried, and people are craving this glory, this weighty, heavy stuff. How do you get it? Well, we know, and we do partake of the glory. We have the way. Not only the way, we have the truth. We have the life, the light. Jesus Christ causes us to partake and to see that glory. And we only get glimpses. I mean, barely anything. But what causes us to see that glory? It's suffering. And I had to put down Numbers 21 next to verse 12, where that little phrase, the fiery trial which comes your way, which is to try you. In Numbers 21, if you're familiar, the original name of the book of Numbers, you might not have known this, was In the Wilderness. That's what it was called, the book. It was just in the wilderness. It became known as the book of Numbers because of the numbering that happens in the book. But if you ever wonder, what happened when they were in the wilderness? Go to the book of Numbers and you'll find, because it records everything that was going on when they were in the wilderness. A lot of wandering. But they got this miraculous stuff called, what is it? Manna. That's what it means. What is it? It was like this coriander bread, seed almost, that fell from heaven miraculously, and it would feed them. It would provide for their needs in the wilderness where there was nothing. And they began to get tired of it. Can you imagine? This stuff that miraculously comes every day. It's perfect. It's nourishing us. I can't stand it. I want something else. I want garlic. I want, whatever. They were missing that stuff in Egypt that they got. And they began to complain. Why you got to give me that? Just starting to complain about the manna. What did God do? Sent them, here's our word, fiery serpents. That just means poisonous snakes. And they bit them. And they died. Not all of them, but they bit some sense into some of them. Because after they were bitten, God told Moses to put a brass pole and put a brass snake on that pole and have the people look to the snake on the pole. And if they would just look, and there were those that said, that makes no sense. That won't work. You're foolish. And they died in their ignorance, in their self-wisdom. But the poisonous snakes, when you looked at that pole, and that snake on that pole, brass being the metal of judgment, the symbol of judgment, the pole being the symbol of the cross, the snake being the symbol of Jesus Christ. If you doubt any of that, go to John chapter 3, verse 14. Jesus himself said, as Moses lifted up the pole, so the Son of Man will be lifted up. But Jesus as a snake? Yeah, your snake. Your snake-like tendencies to deceive, to bite other people. He who knew no sin became what? A sin. The symbol of sin, a serpent, a snake, all that conniving, that depraved humanity, that stuff that we do. He took all that on himself, on the cross. And that was that symbol. When they looked, they were healed. When we look to the cross, we too are healed. People think it's crazy. You take a little cup with juice in it and a cracker, and you think that there's something in that. It's childish. I know. It's foolishness to the world. Isn't it? And they thought the same thing there in the wilderness. It's foolishness. They're going to look to a pole with a snake on it. That's the thing that got us here, the snake. And people do. They dwell on the sin. They exalt the mountain. They forget the maker of the mountain. They exalt the problem. They blow it up out of proportion where they can't see. They no longer see the solution. Jesus Christ. And for some it's too simple. They want it to be more complicated than that, right? But I love this. This little story. I hope you bear with me, okay? The flight is descending. It's coming to a descent. We don't know what is good and what is bad. There's an old story. I hope I can remember. I didn't really write any of this down, but it's really kind of a fun thing. There was a man in China, and his neighbor came to him one day and said, "What's new?" Wanted to know what was going on. And he said, "My horse ran away." And the neighbor said, "Oh, what a bummer. That's awful." And the man said, "How do you know?" The next day the neighbor came back. "What's new?" "My horse came back." "Oh, that's great. How do you know?" The next day the neighbor comes and says, "What's new?" "Oh, my son, he was out riding the horse and he fell and broke his leg." "Oh, that's bad. How do you know?" The next day the neighbor comes back and says, "What's new?" "Oh, the recruiter came through our neighborhood and recruited all the young men to go off into the war. But my son was not taken because his leg was broken." "Oh, that's great. That's great news. How do you know?" And I could go on and on and on with that illustration. I think you get the point. We don't know what is good and what is bad. The same can be said for the suffering that comes in our life. The suffering that comes our way. And what's awesome about what God does is He takes the suffering, the thing that comes into our life, and He transforms it to glory. He does not replace the suffering with something else to bring glory. He transforms the very thing that caused you to suffer. He transforms it into glory. This is what fascinates me, is that the very thing, Jesus Himself gives an illustration in John 19, verse 33 through 36. And He gives the best illustration of it. That's not where it is. John, I better turn there and make sure I'm not. I told you though, Acts 17:11, right? You guys are going to check all this out to see if it's true or not. But John, maybe it is 19. Maybe I got good there. So I don't use my phone to look at the Bible. I use the Bible. Can you believe that? John 19. Yeah, see, that's not it.
You said Acts.
Earlier I said Acts, but John 16:19. There it is. John 16, verse 19. Now Jesus knew that they were desirous to ask Him, and said unto him, Jesus asked His disciples, "Do you inquire among yourselves of that I said, a little while, and ye shall not see me? And again a little while, and you shall see me? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, that you will weep and lament, but the world will be rejoicing, and you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow shall be turned into joy." What is He speaking of? His own crucifixion. The sorrow that you're going to be going through, that very thing that's done to me on the cross, is going to be turned into joy. Now He doesn't stop there. John 16:21. he likens it to a woman when she is in labor pains of birth, in travail. She has sorrow because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, as soon as that child comes into the world, she remembers no more that incredible anguish, that incredible pain, that incredible stretching that happens. Sometimes I just praise the Lord I'm not a woman. You can kill me for that, but I look at my wife, I look at you women, and I have the utmost respect for what you have gone through to bring life into the world. And it's amazing how you forget. As soon as that baby is birthed, as soon as that comes, all of a sudden, it's the pain, all of that morning sickness, all of that stuff that you put up with, it's gone. And when you hear somebody is pregnant, you don't say, "Oh, what a bummer. You're in for it, man. There is going to be pain and anguish and tears, and I hope you don't do that." No. We're excited at the life that's coming. Now here is what John 19:33 has to say. The one I misquoted earlier. John 19:33, it lets us know that when Jesus hung there on that cross, they came and fulfilled prophecy, the soldiers, because they saw that he had already died. And normally they would break their legs, break their bones, and that would kill whoever was there on the crucifixion. But they were fulfilling Psalm 34:20, that not one bone of his body would be broken. And when they pierced his side, it tells us in John 19:33 that out of his side flowed blood and water, the fluids of childbirth. Your water breaks, and there's a lot of blood. I've seen 3 of them up close. The very fluid of birthing a baby came out of Jesus. The first Adam, Genesis 1. From his side came what? A bride. The last Adam, Jesus Christ, on the cross. From his side would be birthed, you and I, the bride of Christ. Isn't that beautiful? The first Adam, from his side, would be birthed a bride. The last Adam, from the cross, out of his side poured that water and that blood to birth the church. You and I, we look to that, and it causes us to be the bride of Christ. So whatever pain, whatever you might be going through, it is nothing compared to the glory. Jesus said he endured the cross for the joy that was set before him. He endured that pain, that sorrow, because it's for a moment. It's light. It's momentary. Romans 8 tells us. It's light. It's not to be compared with the riches that are coming. I love it. So just as we sing these last couple of songs, I'll have the worship team come up and be thinking of him.